Let's get brutally honest for a second. Sometimes your favorite action heroes are nothing like the tough guys they played on screen. In fact, some of them were downright awful when the cameras stopped rolling. Shocking? It should be. Ever wonder what really happened after the fight scenes and car chases ended? What if the real villains were the ones cashing the biggest paychecks? Get ready for the wild, messy truth about the dark side of 80s Hollywood legends. Mel Gibson. On screen, Mel Gibson was the wisecracking cop you wanted on your side, blowing up bad guys and bending the rules for justice in Lethal Weapon. Off screen, he was blowing up in ways nobody wanted to see. It's hard to overstate just how badly Gibson tarnished his own image, especially after audiences spent the 80s rooting for his swagger and charm. The truth started to leak out in the late 80s, but the real meltdown exploded later. Gibson became notorious for a volatile temper, unchecked rage, and, worst of all, a mouth that could torch his career overnight. Shocking phone recordings, ugly public tirades, and documented outbursts revealed a man completely unhinged. Racist comments, insults, and angry rants weren't just whispered rumors, they were headline news. This wasn't a one-time meltdown either. Police were called, relationships destroyed, and Gibson's reputation became Hollywood's hottest mess. How does someone go from beloved buddy cop to outcast? It wasn't just what he said, but how often he kept saying it. Directors distanced themselves, studios ran for cover, and former co-stars spoke out about his behavior. If you ever wondered whether Hollywood really forgives everything, Mel Gibson is living proof that some lines just can't be uncrossed. He may have played the hero, but behind closed doors, his behavior was anything but. So, next time you watch him leap through a plate glass window or crack a joke with Danny Glover, remember, sometimes the real action happens far away from the script, and sometimes the hero is just the latest villain. Steven Seagal. If you thought Steven Seagal was intense on camera, you haven't heard the real stories. With his trademark ponytail, stone-faced glare, and arms that could snap you like a breadstick, Seagal ruled the late 80s action scene. But behind the steely persona was a man so wrapped up in his own ego, he made his movie villains look almost charming. Let's start with the legendary arrogance. Seagal strutted onto every set acting like a martial arts messiah, regularly belittling stuntmen, challenging co-stars, and demanding scripts be rewritten to make him look tougher. The stories of him refusing to lose a single fight scene became a running Hollywood joke. He made sure no one ever upstaged Steven Seagal, except for the avalanche of controversy that crashed into his personal life. Offset, things got worse. Seagal was hit with numerous lawsuits over the years from former assistants, crew members, and even producers who called him out for abusive behavior. Several colleagues alleged he bullied, threatened, and physically intimidated people just for kicks. Others described him as a walking lawsuit, leaving drama and chaos everywhere he went. And then there are the endless rumors and reports tying Seagal to shady connections and questionable business dealings. The man could break an arm in a fight scene, but he broke a lot more trust behind closed doors. Seagal wanted to be seen as a real-life hero. But the real-life story is a parade of burned bridges, lawsuits, and an ego too big for any movie set. Watching his old films, you might cheer when he takes down the bad guy, but off-screen, the only thing Seagal was really beating was his own reputation. Chuck Norris. You know the Chuck Norris meme, the man who can split a mountain with a roundhouse kick and defeat bad guys without breaking a sweat. But if you dig a little deeper, Chuck's off-screen life is less heroic and more, well, complicated. For a guy who played the all-American tough guy in every role, Norris had a knack for pushing boundaries, not always in a good way. Norris built his brand on rugged, old-school values, but that didn't stop him from stirring up storms. He became infamous for wielding his fame to champion divisive causes, openly supporting controversial groups and taking extreme stances on everything from social issues to politics. Norris's name regularly popped up in connection with organizations known for intolerance and hardline views. Suddenly, the action star who once saved the day was picking fights outside the movie theater. But it wasn't just about politics. Norris was known for his ironclad sense of self-importance, refusing to work with co-stars he didn't like and demanding top billing in every project. Former collaborators have described him as controlling, stubborn, and, ironically, a bit of a bully behind the scenes. He took the tough guy act off the screen and straight into real life, stepping on toes whenever he felt threatened. The legend of Chuck Norris might have been built on superhuman feats and one-liners, but the real story is messier. Fans wanted a hero, but they got a man so sure of his own myth that he stopped caring who he alienated along the way. So next time you hear a Chuck Norris joke, ask yourself, do you really want to know how deep that punch goes? Sylvester Stallone. If Sylvester Stallone's life were a movie, the plot twists wouldn't stop at the end credits. Rocky, Rambo, Cobra, he played icons of grit and perseverance, fighting against impossible odds. But in real life, Stallone's biggest battles happened when the cameras were off and the headlines started rolling in. It's no secret that Stallone loved the spotlight, but he wasn't always gracious sharing it. Hollywood insiders tell tales of epic feuds and on-set explosions, with Sly refusing to play nice with directors, crew, or even co-stars. His legendary temper led to screaming matches, walkouts, and enough thrown objects to fill a Rocky training montage. It wasn't just temper tantrums. Stallone was investigated multiple times for assault and accused by several people of harassing or intimidating behavior. Though charges rarely stuck, the cloud of controversy seemed to follow him everywhere, like a bad movie sequel. Stallone also became known for wielding his star power to get his way. Want your character to live? Too bad, Stallone's the hero, and he decides who makes it out alive. Directors and screenwriters have shared stories about Stallone rewriting entire scripts, demanding last-minute changes, and threatening to walk off set unless his vision ruled the day. For every underdog he played, there was a real underdog behind the scenes, steamrolled by Sly's ego. Of course, none of this stopped his box office run. Fans kept showing up for his next big brawl, and the money kept pouring in. But the bigger Stallone got, the more he seemed to bulldoze anyone who got in his way. Watching him take on the world in slow-motion glory, you might cheer for the ultimate fighter. But remember, every hero's got a dark side, and for Sly, the real fight was always off camera. Arnold Schwarzenegger. He came to America with a dream, a chiseled jaw, and enough muscle to fill a dozen movie posters. Arnold Schwarzenegger wasn't just an action star, he was the action star of the 80s. But behind the bodybuilder smile and blockbuster roles, Arnold's real-life choices turned him into a tabloid headline more often than a hero. The dark side started with rumors from his bodybuilding days, where competitors claimed Arnold played dirty to win, sometimes with mind games, sometimes with outright sabotage. Fast forward to Hollywood, and the stories got bigger. Schwarzenegger became notorious for wielding his fame to get whatever he wanted, on or off the set. His appetite for power was legendary, but his respect for boundaries? Not so much. Over the years, Arnold admitted to affairs that broke up his own family, including a now-famous scandal involving his longtime housekeeper. Reports flooded in about his habit of making inappropriate advances and crude jokes, often at the expense of women he worked with. Colleagues described an environment where what Arnold wants, Arnold gets, whether that meant rewriting scripts or ignoring people's comfort zones. Even after he became governor, new allegations surfaced, painting a picture of a man who refused to play by the rules if the rules didn't suit him. For every blockbuster hit, there seemed to be another personal controversy lurking just off screen. So next time you watch him toss someone through a wall or save the world with a shotgun and a one-liner, remember, the real Arnold was fighting his own battles behind closed doors. Sometimes the villain you root against is the same guy signing autographs in the lobby. Dolph Lungren. Dolph Lundgren exploded onto the scene as Ivan Drago in Rocky IV, delivering lines like, "If he dies, with all the warmth of a Siberian winter. But as intimidating as he was on screen, stories from behind the scenes painted a picture that was even frostier. Lundgren's image as a no-nonsense tough guy wasn't just an act, it was his reality, and not in a good way. During his early days in Hollywood, Lundgren's temper became legendary. Crew members and co-stars remember a man who could go from silent to furious in the blink of an eye. There were reports of him trashing hotel rooms after bad days on set, breaking furniture, and shouting at staff. He'd arrive late, leave early, and make it clear that patience was never part of his personal workout routine. It didn't stop with tantrums. Lundgren's relationships were marked by jealousy and possessiveness, often leading to ugly public arguments. There were incidents where security was called to de-escalate situations, and more than one director has admitted that they thought twice before working with him again. Even those who admired his physical power found him nearly impossible to handle when the cameras weren't rolling. Fans loved the stoic, almost robotic Drago. But in real life, that emotional ice was often directed at the wrong people, friends, family, and colleagues who found themselves on the wrong side of his bad moods. Over time, Lundgren mellowed and opened up about his struggles, but in the 80s, his reputation was set in stone. You crossed Dolph at your own risk. Next time you watch him land a punch, just remember, his real fight was staying in control, and he didn't always win. Tommy Tiny Lister. When you saw Tommy Tiny Lister show up in a movie, you knew things were about to get rough. With a build like a bulldozer and a glare that could clear a room, Lister became the go-to heavy for 80s action and wrestling flicks. What you might not know is that his off-screen persona was every bit as intimidating and, at times, criminal as the brutes he played. Lister's path to stardom was anything but smooth. After bouncing between wrestling and acting, he quickly gained a reputation for starting trouble wherever he went. Bar fights, angry outbursts, and stories of intimidating fans and fellow actors became just as much a part of his brand as his on-screen brawls. For some, it was all part of the act. But for people who had to work with him, it was exhausting and sometimes scary. In the decades after his 80s peak, Lister's criminal record caught up with him. He was arrested for fraud, caught up in a massive mortgage scheme that made national headlines. He'd already racked up several assault charges by that point, living up to his tough guy image in all the worst ways. The persona that made him famous was, it turned out, no act. He really was that aggressive when the lights weren't shining. It's easy to love a villain in the movies, but in real life, the line between performance and reality gets blurry. Lister might have played characters you love to hate, but for some people, he was just plain trouble. Next time you watch him face down a hero, ask yourself, is this just good acting, or is it a glimpse at the man behind the mask? Jean-Claude Van Damme. Jean-Claude Van Damme leapt into the 80s action scene like a real-life superhero. Splits, kicks, and a glare that said, "Don't mess with me." His rise from European karate champ to Hollywood star in movies like Bloodsport and Kickboxer looked like a dream. But off-screen, Van Damme's personal life was a whirlwind of chaos and destruction, often fueled by his own worst impulses. During his meteoric rise, Van Damme built a reputation for partying hard and living fast. He tore through Hollywood's club scene with the same intensity he brought to fight choreography, leaving a trail of wild stories in his wake. But the real damage happened in private. His marriages were turbulent, with frequent breakups and public arguments. Friends and colleagues described a man whose mood could flip instantly, going from charming to raging in a heartbeat. It didn't help that Van Damme's appetite for risk extended far beyond movie stunts. He struggled with addiction and was frequently involved in brawls at parties and on set. There were stories of him getting physical with directors and crew, always insisting he knew best, and occasionally pushing things too far, literally. The action star's greatest opponent wasn't any movie villain, but his own out-of-control behavior. As the 90s rolled in, the consequences of Van Damme's choices started catching up with him. Burned bridges, broken relationships, and a reputation that made some directors wary. He later admitted to making a mess of things and worked to clean up his act, but the wild ride of the 80s left its mark. Next time you see Van Damme land a flying kick, remember, his biggest fight was always with himself. Mickey Rourke. If Hollywood ever needed a poster child for self-destruction, Mickey Rourke would be front and center. With smoldering looks and an unpredictable edge, he electrified the 80s in gritty roles like Angel Heart and Year of the Dragon. But his raw, dangerous energy didn't stay on screen. Off-camera, Rourke became notorious for taking bad boy to another level. Rourke's temper was legendary, and he didn't care who knew it. He was known for storming off sets, lashing out at directors, and picking fights with co-stars. His explosive mood swings and confrontational attitude left producers walking on eggshells, never knowing when the next eruption might come. Stories circulated about Rourke trashing dressing rooms and even getting into fistfights during filming. But it didn't stop there. Rourke's personal life was a revolving door of chaos, from his turbulent relationships to run-ins with the law. He was arrested for assault more than once and developed a reputation for reckless behavior both behind the wheel and in public. Instead of distancing himself from the bad press, Rourke leaned in, fueling his image as Hollywood's resident wild child. Despite all this, he kept finding work, thanks to undeniable talent and a charisma you couldn't ignore, even if you wanted to. Yet, for every gritty performance, there was another story about someone who'd been burned by trusting Rourke. His off-screen life became a cautionary tale about talent gone wild and about how quickly Hollywood will forgive, but never forget. So next time you see Rourke play an unhinged anti-hero, just remember, it wasn't just acting. For Mickey, the drama was always real, and sometimes the scariest stories never made it to the screen. James Woods. James Woods brought a sharp intelligence and biting sarcasm to every role, whether as a cop, a hitman, or a fast-talking hustler. He was the guy you couldn't look away from on screen. Off-screen, though, Woods was the guy you might cross the street to avoid. For decades, his personal life has been a storm of controversy, confrontations, and frankly, some pretty awful behavior. Woods has always relished his reputation as Hollywood's resident troublemaker. Colleagues described him as brilliant but impossible, with a mouth that rarely slowed down and opinions that burned bridges faster than most people can build them. He developed a habit of suing people who disagreed with him, from ex-partners to former colleagues, dragging messy disputes into the public eye and the courtroom. It didn't help that Woods became infamous for harassing people, especially women, online and off, often crossing the line from debate to outright intimidation. There have been restraining orders, lawsuits, and a constant hum of discomfort around his name. Producers and casting agents learned to think twice before bringing him on board, wary of the drama that might follow. For a while, Woods thrived on the chaos, but eventually, his off-screen persona started costing him roles. The man who once seemed to have Hollywood at his feet ended up on the outside looking in, more famous for his feuds than his films. Watching him play a villain in the movies, you get the sense he isn't stretching much. Next time you see Woods on screen, delivering lines with a wicked gleam in his eye, ask yourself, is this just great acting or a glimpse of the real deal? In his case, it might just be both. Brian Bosworth. When you think of Brian Bosworth, you might picture wild hair, loud jackets, and a swagger that could fill a football stadium. The Boz tried to turn that persona into big-screen stardom with 1991's Stone Cold, but his bad boy reputation was built long before he showed up in Hollywood. The real Bosworth story is one of broken rules, blown opportunities, and a self-created legend that spiraled way out of control. Long before his action hero debut, Bosworth was college football's most infamous rebel, racking up NCAA violations, trash-talking opponents, and pulling off publicity stunts that left coaches and fans shaking their heads. He was suspended for steroid use, staged fake shootings for attention, and routinely bent the truth to keep himself in the headlines. When he finally made it to the NFL, Bosworth's mouth got him in almost as much trouble as his body, and he lasted just a couple of seasons before injuries and his attitude wore thin. Hollywood saw his brash style and cast him as the ultimate tough guy, but Bosworth's bad habits followed him. On set, he was demanding and difficult, with producers struggling to rein him in. Instead of making friends, he alienated colleagues and earned a reputation for letting his ego run wild. By the time his acting career fizzled, the legend of the Boz was more about mayhem than movie magic. Next time you catch Stone Cold on late-night TV, remember, for Bosworth, Life as an action hero wasn't just a role, it was an excuse to let his worst impulses run free, and that left a lot of wreckage both on and off the field. Tom Sizemore. Tom Sizemore didn't break out in a big way until the early 90s, but he started his acting grind in the late 80s, bringing an intensity that made him perfect for military tough guys, cops, and grizzled anti-heroes. Off-screen, though, Sizemore's real-life drama dwarfed anything Hollywood could dream up. The phrase, troubled star, doesn't even begin to cover it. His life was an ever-escalating mess of chaos, law-breaking, and heartbreak. Sizemore's problems began with addiction, which quickly spiraled out of control. He burned through opportunities, torched friendships, and left a trail of broken contracts wherever he went. The real trouble came with his frequent run-ins with the law. He was arrested for violence, accused of mistreating partners, and had so many public meltdowns that producers started to see him as more trouble than he was worth. On more than one occasion, Sizemore's behavior led to him being banned from movie sets or facing lawsuits for his outbursts. It wasn't just about addiction and tempers. There were stories of him behaving recklessly with cast and crew, ignoring boundaries, and making life on set a living nightmare for everyone involved. Instead of learning from his mistakes, Sizemore often doubled down, blaming everyone but himself for the disasters in his wake. Fans loved him for the raw power he brought to roles, but that same intensity made him unpredictable and sometimes dangerous in real life. In the end, Tom Sizemore became a cautionary tale, a man whose off-screen chaos overwhelmed his on-screen talent. When you watch him play a ticking time bomb in a movie, know this: he wasn't acting, and Hollywood eventually had to back away from the real-life drama he brought everywhere he went. So, there you have it, the flip side of your favorite 80s action heroes, and a side Hollywood would rather you forget. Turns out, the wildest stunts happened when the cameras stopped rolling. Did any of these stories change the way you see your old favorites? Who surprised you most, and who else should make the list? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit subscribe for more eye-opening deep dives, and remember, sometimes the real drama is always off-screen.